Hello and welcome back. Today I want to do my May wrap-up. I find that my reading slows down as the weather gets warmer, so I'm going to do all of my books in one video. But what you're losing in quantity this month, you're making up for in quality because I pretty much loved everything I read this month, so I have a lot of books to recommend. First, let's talk horror. And honestly, I've had a couple misses in the last few months with the genre, but I'm happy to say that I found a horror book this month that I really enjoyed. That was The Ruins by Scott Smith, and I have to thank a lot of my viewers for recommending this book to me. I posted a horror TBR a few weeks back, and because I was talking about body horror in that video, several people said I would really like The Ruins, and they were absolutely right. Now, if you're not familiar with the story, this is about a group of travelers who head to a warmer climate for vacation. They wander away from their hotel and, due to circumstances, get forced to move up a hill and get stuck there for a long period of time. And from there, the story really becomes one of survival, and that's where a lot of those horror aspects come from, is what people are willing to do in order to survive. At the same time, the story does have some supernatural aspects, which were a touch unbelievable at times. You really do need to suspend your disbelief and just go along with it, but I feel like that's the case with any horror story. Because whether it be a ghost or vampire, whatever the case is, there's usually something that's a little bit, larger than life going on. And I just found this story really gripping. It's very fast paced. I think it's perfect for like an airplane ride or reading slump, or time where you just need a book that's going to grab you and just hold your attention. I read it in a really distracted setting, and that did not in any way take away from my enjoyment of the story. The writing itself is probably pretty average. I don't think it's a story that's going to change my life in any way, but if you want just a fun, good horror story, this is a great one to pick up. And I personally really enjoyed those grosser aspects to this book. It's got some really disturbing, dark scenes to it. Definitely those elements of body horror that I was dying for, and if you can handle it, you probably don't want to be eating while you read certain chapters, but it was gripping and I just loved it. Definitely recommend that one. Now, I just want to briefly talk about the two science fiction books that I read this month. The first being A Closed and Common Orbit by Becky Chambers. This, of course, is a follow-up to her beloved book around BookTube, A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, and I really enjoyed the sequel. Most people prefer the first book and find this second book just not quite as good, but I think I actually prefer the second. I don't want to say too much about the plot because it will spoil some of the ending events from the first book, but this book is much more focused on just a few characters, and the tone of the book is a little bit more serious. I felt the first book was incredibly cute and optimistic, while this book deals with a little bit more difficult subject matter like abuse. This book, what I particularly loved about it is that there's a large focus on artificial intelligence and the question of what makes a person alive or sentient, and I really enjoy those aspects in science fiction, so that right there really hooked me in. Compared to the first book, I think it has a stronger narrative. It really drives the story forward with two different timelines that go back and forth that tell a complete story, and I just thought it was really well done. I definitely enjoyed it. If you like the first one, it is worth getting the follow-up book and reading it as soon as possible because I just really loved it. I also read another BookTube favorite, and that was the novella Binti by Nnedi Okorafor. And this is all about a young woman from an African country set in the future where she travels away from Earth in order to go to university on another planet. In this world, it's very uncommon for people from her community to travel outside of Earth, but she is determined to get to this university. Her people are very advanced and have a really interesting take on futuristic technology, but at the same time they hold true to their culture, and there's a lot of references to her own African background, and I love the inclusion of this futuristic technology with her culture. I didn't expect to love this book as much as I did, but it was just as good as everyone said it was. It felt refreshing and different, and it was nice to see science fiction that wasn't so European, North American centric, and it was just really good. So if you haven't picked it up, it's super short and fast to read, and I would definitely recommend that one as well. Next, I listened to 3 audiobooks which all happen to be nonfiction. The first was Year of Yes by Shonda Rhimes, and I should preface this by saying that I have not watched any of her shows. I've never watched Grey's Anatomy or Making a Murder, which I probably should rectify, but needless to say, I was still just interested in reading her memoir because I knew that it focused on the idea of saying yes to more things. Now, I expected this memoir to be more about the general idea of just saying yes to opportunities, but it's actually more insightful than that. It's more about just saying yes to yourself, saying yes to your health, to your family, to your personal needs. This book is heavily focused on self-care and is very positive. I found it a very uplifting story. At the same time, as with any celebrity memoir, her life is so different than mine. I felt like she did a good job of recognizing her own privilege and pointing out that she has resources that the average person does not, and that was good. Overall, it was an enjoyable story. I probably would have loved it more if I had a connection to her as a celebrity, and I really didn't. Now, it's still nonfiction, but a very different book. I also read Adnan's Story by Rabia Chaudry, and this, of course, is the follow-up to the Serial podcast, which you know I was obsessed with. If you have not listened to it, it's all about the murder of a young girl. This is true crime, and this podcast told the story of a man who was convicted for that. And the Serial podcast is basically looking over this cold case, trying to figure out whether or not he was innocent. And you know, I found the podcast completely addicting. I honestly was completely obsessed. But since then, I never did listen to the follow-up podcast Disclosure, so I don't know if there's a lot of overlap within this book compared to that podcast. But I was interested enough to go back and read this one. I'll admit that I actually lean toward the side of being suspicious of Adnan's innocence. So going into this book, I was very cautious because it's obviously very biased in favor of Adnan, and while it was very biased, I felt Rabia wrote a lot of conjecture and theories as if they were cold hard facts. At the same time, she made some really compelling arguments, and arguably I would say I'm more leaning towards his innocence, as much as one can ever know from the mess of facts. But regardless, she really did convince me that there was a lot of criminal negligence in terms of the legal system really letting down a young man and convicting him without enough evidence. So all that being said, it was worth reading if you've listened to the Serial podcast. If you haven't, I don't think it would make a lot of sense. I definitely recommend the podcast if you have not listened to it, and then go pick up this book. But if you're like me, love the podcast, and we're just left wanting more, this is worth picking up. I didn't expect to get so pulled back into it, but I listened to it as an audio, and it really filled that void and definitely just sucked me back into that world again. Now, just briefly mention a health and nutrition book that I read, and that was Slim for Life by Jillian Michaels. I don't want to talk a lot about like health books on my channel, honestly, but I'm trying to get in a big health kick and eat as well as possible. After a year of trying to gain weight, I'm finally trying to maintain the weight that I have without eating a whole lot of junk food, and Jillian Michaels is my fitness guru. I love her workouts, so I was really excited to reread one of her books. I definitely enjoyed it and would love to get recommendations on more books about health and fitness that really inspire you when you kind of need a kick to stop eating so much ice cream and eat some more fruits and veggies. So love some recommendations for that. Otherwise, I'll keep moving. Now, May ended up being a really weird month for me in terms of genre, because if you know me, I love my mysteries and thrillers. And when I did my tally up for this video, I realized that I read a total of one book this month that qualifies for the genres. But while I didn't read a lot, the book I read was fantastic. And if you've been following all my videos, you probably already know what that is. But I need to recommend I'm Thinking of Ending Things by Iain Reid. I already did a separate review on this one because I feel like it's underhyped and I want more people to read it. I absolutely love this one. This is about a couple who are driving in a dark, cold night over to meet the boy's parents for the first time. They've been dating for a little while, and it's time to make that commitment. But at the same time, the girl is thinking to herself that she is thinking of ending things and breaking off the relationship. And the story really takes off from there. It's one that you don't want to know too much going into, but it's very suspenseful, very atmospheric. I called it literary suspense in my review video because I don't want to call it a psychological thriller. There isn't a lot of action, and it's really quite different and unique than a lot of those typical psychological thrillers that get churned out year after year lately. But this is one that's just very special, and for me, I love the writing, which was concise. I could just gush about it for another 6 minutes, but instead I'm going to point you to my video. But trust me, if you want to try something a little bit unique, It's a great reading experience. It's very short and I would love more people to read it, bearing in mind that it has ridiculously low ratings on Goodreads. I think it has like a 3.3 rating, which normally I don't even read books that get that low of a rating, but I ended up picking it up and it was well worth it. While it's not for everyone, it was absolutely a book for me. I loved it. I want to reread it immediately and I'm basically just obsessed. It left me with such a big book hangover, so please consider picking it up just for my sake. I would love to know what you think and message me when you're done because it's a book that you definitely are going to want to talk about afterwards. Finally, I want to talk graphic novels, and I read Big Mushy Happy Lump by Sarah Andersen. This is her second collection of webcomics, and I really enjoyed them. Her books are always really cute and cartoony, dealing with a lot of things from social anxiety to the challenges of being a young adult, as in a 20-something adult, I should say, and her books are just really funny. I don't normally like funny books, but these comics just work for me. I found the second collection even funnier than the first, and I would just definitely recommend it if you need a super fast, fun read, just something really lighthearted to put you in a good mood. I just thought it was awesome and definitely look forward to reading her next collection. It was great. The other thing I read was a manga series, Fullmetal Alchemist. I actually read volume 1 last year and I really enjoyed it and meant to continue on, and then I just didn't. So I'm finally getting back into it. I'm going to be mentioning it in a lot of wrap-ups, so I'm going to keep my synopsis really short, but I might do a separate review at the end once I've read it all if you're interested. And yes, I have already watched both the anime, which is fantastic, but I'm really enjoying the manga reading experience. This is about a set of brothers set in this fantasy world where their mother has died and they try to bring her back to life using alchemy. Something goes terribly wrong and they end up losing their bodies, or at least part of their bodies, in this terrible disaster. And the books take place after those events and they're essentially trying to get their bodies back and undo the damage they did. It deals with a lot of themes like family and brotherhood, and it is both very dark, dealing with a lot of difficult and grim subject matter, but yet it's surprisingly funny at the same time. Again, I might do a whole separate review because there's a lot of feelings and thoughts about this one, but I want to keep this short because there's a lot of volumes left to go, so I'll be reading this one for the next several months. So those were all the books I read in the month of May. As always, please let me know if you're planning on picking up any of the books I just mentioned, and also let me know what was the best book you read in the month of May. I hope your reading is going really well. I will talk to you again soon in another video. Thanks for watching. Okay, bye.